welcome to the Iowa Grazing Academy. These are the recordings from the 5 online sessions that were held in July of 2026. If you have any questions, please contact Shelby Gress at the email address listed on the slide. Thank you and enjoy these sessions. Hello and welcome.
Thanks for having me. Again, my name is Margaret Chamas, and I have a bunch of different hats that I wear in various roles. I was really chuffed when Dr. Gross asked me to come talk about rotational stocking because that quite literally was my master's research. I was like mentioned back when 100,000 pounds per acre seemed like cutting edge and extreme. I had the fortune of working at Iowa State to test out a couple different stocking strategies and see what it did to the animals. So bits and pieces of that will flow through this presentation. But the big takeaway, I'll tell you up front, is that it all depends. There's a lot of variables, and the best strategy is being flexible, adaptable, and finding something that works for you. With that, I want to make sure that, just to make sure we're all speaking the same language, a few terms and concepts that I'll be using. Okay, so we already heard the difference or the mention of rotational grazing and rotational stocking. In a very technical sense, stocking is probably the more correct term because that's talking about the system and the management behind the grazing that the animals actually do. I think it was my PI who I heard saying that, really rotational grazing means the cow is grazing it, walking in a circle. Colloquially, it's all about the same, but if you wondered why the title of this has been rotational stocking, that's why, because we're talking about the management, we're talking about the strategy and the system behind how those animals are eating. When I say pasture today, that's describing like the large land area, the 40 acres, the 20 acres. We may subdivide that into smaller paddocks. And so those subdivisions are what I will refer to as paddocks. I think that's pretty much industry standard at this point, but I hear a lot of different terms thrown around. And a big concept we go into with all this is overgrazing. We don't want overgrazing. I think some people hear overgrazing and think of well, I think of what my horses have done to my dry lot, and it's down to nubbins. There almost is no grass. And that certainly is overgrazing, but overgrazing can also happen to individual plants, often the ones we like that are grazed and then grazed again because they never get to rest and recover. So when I say an overgrazed pasture, it may not be because it looks like a moonscape. It may be because certain patches, certain species have been grazed into oblivion and never allowed to recover. You might hear me say, or somebody else say, residual. So that's generally the forage mass that we leave in a pasture when we move the animal, or in a paddock when we move the animals to a new one. Residual is part of the resiliency of a rotational grazing system. Knowing your residual, monitoring your residual is something that you'll hear a lot of like grazing gurus talk about. And then getting a bit into semantics here again, but these are ones you'll hear me talk about. Stocking density versus stocking rate. So I'll have a diagram later, but stocking rate refers to the number of animals and the total area, usually of the pasture. So if you have 10 cows, but a 50-acre pasture, you have, 10 divided by 50 is like 1/5 cow per acre. But when we talk about stocking density, which is really one of the things we're influencing with rotational stocking strategies, that is the animal or animal unit or animal body weight per given area, like an acre, at a certain point in time. So there's a difference between 10 cows on 10 acres for 10, for like a whole season versus 10 cows on 1/10 of an acre for one day. So that's the density, even though that might be part of a bigger system. Part of why I want to bring up these terms and concepts is that very frustratingly, there is no single accepted definition of rotational stocking or what makes it mob stocking or ultra high density stocking. So this is mostly to make sure that you understand what I'm referring to, and we'll get into the nuance later. There is kind of a definition of rotational stocking in general. It's a grazing system in which animals are rotated among 2 or more paddocks with recurring periods of grazing and rest during the grazing season. That's taken from this handbook on the right, Pasture Management for Livestock Producers. Highly recommend it. It's like $5 from the Iowa State publications list, and it covers a lot of the science and the mentality and the management behind pastures. It's not very prescriptive, but there certainly are some handy tools But it's just a good background on all the different sorts of considerations for stocking density, rotation frequency, and gets into, paddock design, things like that. So rotational stocking is a contrast to continuous stocking, where 50 cows are put out on 50 acres and just left to eat whatever and whenever they want. So when we rotate them, we're saying, nope, you eat this now, you'll eat that later. And that is really where the magic happens. We move animals from paddock to paddock to paddock as they consume available forage. We're generally assuming, and again, when I'm talking about this today, I'm generally assuming that when we rotate animals from one paddock to the next, we are excluding them from the previously grazed forage. So we're installing a back fence. This allows the plants in that paddock to regrow and recover. Most plants start that regrowth within 4 to 7 days of defoliation, which is an important concept to remember because our grazing livestock will generally try and eat that regrowth because it's much more nutritious, it's tender, it's tasty. That's what leads to overgrazing. So by rotating animals between paddocks, we are preventing overgrazing, we're allowing forage plants to recover. And we're offering some benefits to the animals and to the pasture as a whole and our entire system, hopefully. So again, a couple comparisons. Rotational stocking increases the stocking density. The stocking rate may be the same, but that density will differ. So our example here, we've got 3 scenarios. We have 10 acres of pasture with 10 cow-calf pairs, and they're grazing from about May through October. In a continuous stocking system, the top box there, the 10 cows just have access to all 10 acres the whole season. There's probably plenty of forage. They're probably going to eat their favorite things. Over time, we may see their favorite species die out because they've selectively grazed them into oblivion, and we're probably going to see a lot of thistles or other undesirable, unpalatable forages. In the second middle scenario, rotational stocking at a very basic level. Split the pasture in half. Say there's a pond in the middle or a water tank that they can get to from either side. Cows have access to 5 acres at a time, and the farmer flips them back and forth every couple of months, just as things get greener or thicker, or he notices it's starting to get a little bit low on one side. So just very simple, back and forth. We've increased the stocking density quite a bit, but the stocking rate is still the same. And then another iteration of rotational stocking. So now we've split that 10-acre pasture into 1-acre paddocks, and those cows are rotated every week. Generally, they just go from one to the next to the next. Again, that back fence is installed. We're allowing those paddocks to rest. And after some amount of time, they end up back at the beginning again, where the forage should have recovered long before now. A couple different variations, and these are kind of food for thought ideas and or things that you may hear or may learn about other places. This is a survey or a smattering of the options. There are many benefits and considerations for each, but here they are. What I call strip stocking, I think some people call drift grazing, and there's probably other terms for it, but what I call strip stocking. Animals start out in one paddock, and then we're offering new forage every now and again, whatever our preferred rate is or our necessary rate is. But we may not install a back fence. So we pull up the fence, the cows can move into that new area of forage. Later on, we're pulling up another fence. They can move even further on. In this instance, the advantage here is that you can put water and minerals in one location and not have to drag them around as much. It's much less labor in that sense. So you get some of the benefits of rotational stocking with a bit less labor. The trick here is to make sure that you do move the animals on or put in a back fence before you get too much nice new lush regrowth and they start going back to the first area they've been on and consuming that. And then the most amorphous term I think I've ever heard, mob stocking, which is also sometimes ultra high stock density grazing. And so the general concept of mob stocking or ultra high stock density grazing, we are cranking that stocking density through the roof. And we're moving pretty often. And often that also includes very long rest periods. In some, but not all cases, this is also associated with deliberately letting the animals consume, say, 60, 70, 80% of the available forage rather than leaving that residual, rather than leaving several inches there to regrow from. So this might be you're rotating multiple times a day, people pushing 1 million pounds of body weight per acre per day, rest periods sometimes like a year or so. So there's a huge kind of degrees of difference within this system, but this is the sort of thing people are talking about. That photo is from my grad research, and that was one of my mob stocked pastures. You can see the polyrope on the near side of the cows, and then you can kind of see it on the top left behind the cows. You can see they did not have a lot of space. We were moving them 4 times a day, so pretty high stocking density, a lot of movement, a lot of labor, and it was just interesting to see how it affected the cows and the forage. So, okay, yeah, we're rotating around in a long pattern. These moves might be multiple times a day. At the end, we're coming back to that original spot and starting the system over again. Hopefully, Carson doesn't get too frustrated at me. Hopefully, I represent this right. Management intensive grazing is another variation of stocking or rotational stocking, often on the more frequent rotation, slightly higher stocking density side of things. So those general characteristics. But one of the real important things, it's kind of a mindset difference as I understand it. Rather than simply saying, I want to make sure we have 38 days of regrowth before we get back to a pasture because that's what the textbook says, or we're going to rotate all the way through the paddocks, kind of like this diagram on the bottom right. Management intensive grazing might have you rotating through part of the pastures, but you're monitoring the regrowth, you're monitoring the recovery, seeing when those plants get to a specific point that tells you this is when they are the right nutrition, the right mass that's available for my class of cattle. So it might mean you short circuit the rest of the rotation scheme and go back to the beginning because maybe it's already recovered. This allows you to set aside some stockpile on those bottom rows of pastures, or you can bring in other groups of animals. It's the management is the focus. And if you look at the little acronym, the M is capitalized, the G is capitalized, the I is not. Part of the emphasis is that the management is what is intensive, less the grazing. All right, a couple components of this if you're getting ready to set up a system. Rotational stocking at its core is putting us in control of forage consumption and forage recovery. We're creating deliberate areas of disturbance and rest. We are timing rotation when we either get to a certain level of nutrition in the recovered plants or we're starting to see certain changes. We can defer grazing and allow a stockpile. So again, we are deliberately managing the pastures to achieve a specific outcome by using animals as tools. The photos here are from where I'm doing some rotational grazing with my goats. And you can see at the top in the fall, I hit that hard. I let them graze down. It was a very thick mat of vetch and a few other things. A lot of weeds, had a lot of heavy, equipment that had gone through there. And so I let the goats really graze that down pretty hard. And then I gave it 8 months of rest. So the photo I took on the bottom was just a couple of weeks ago. You can start to see some of the variety of things we have deliberately introduced rest and then allowed recovery. And now I have what is for me and my goats, and the fact that I'm trying to attract like pollinators and stuff. I'm pretty happy with the outcome, but that was created because of deliberate rotation. So the management levers we employ with a rotational stocking scheme. We're controlling how many animals there are, how many grazers. We're controlling the space we allocate to them and the amount of time that we give them in a specific area and the amount of time that we allow that area to rest. Really what we're doing is we are determining how much of what things our animals eat and or trample, and that's kind of driving the results of the grazing, both in terms of how the animals are performing and then what happens to the pasture. Adjusting these different things, like I said, drives those changes, those outcomes. If we have more animals, especially in a given space, we get more consumption or more trampling of that forage. If we give the same animals more space, then we're reducing the intensity of grazing. They're not going to be competing with each other. They have more space to spread out. They might not trample things as much. If we allow for more time in a pasture or in a paddock, we're going to increase the intensity. The animals are there longer. They're going to consume more of what's available or trample more of what's available. And then also on the time scheme, more time between grazing events gives those plants more time to recover. Generally, that's a good thing. There may be times where we deliberately don't want things to recover. And then that's the case shown here. So this is an example of a fixed amount of animals, not a huge number, given a lot of time and a lot of space. So this is my goats clearing up the edge of my pond. I want them to selectively graze and regraze and regraze those willows and those annoying woodies that I really don't want growing into the pond dam. The goats are preferentially eating that, ignoring the lower growing stuff below it because they have a lot of time to keep coming back and regrazing the same things. They have a lot of space to go find their favorite things all along the pond dam. And there's a moderate amount of animals here, so they're not really driving competition by the sheer number of animals, just by the time. Interestingly, though, a lot of undergrowth, and so now I'm bringing sheep in behind them to clear up all the stuff on the bottom. I will say, one of the biggest levers that both affects how we manage, it should affect how we manage, and it also affects the outcomes, is the weather. Mother Nature bats last. We can't help that. And so management, how we're managing our pastures will be impacted by weather and impacts how we respond. So an example, in that photo there, the right half of that picture is one of my mob stocked areas when I was a grad student, when it rained. And I had a lot of cows, a lot of body weight in a very tiny area. And so they pugged the snot out of that. That's actually not the worst one we had. They pugged it up. They did a lot of damage. But because of the management, because of the limited time and limited space, it's a very small part of the pasture that was damaged. Would we even see a lot of pugging if they'd had access to an entire acre for that time? I don't know. What I can say, though, is from comparing the effects of rain on this part of the pasture to my other treatment groups, which were 10 cows on an entire acre for like a week and a half. Over that week and a half, especially if it rained, we would get paths, we get loafing areas. So I actually preferred the limited impact of cows in one tight area like this. On the flip side of this, though, if we have drought, that's going to affect how we stock our animals. A lot of times you'll hear people say when forage growth is slow, rotate slow. So you don't rotate animals as often. You make them eat more of the available forage. You utilize every bit that's there to try and outlast the drought. And then you have to give those areas a long time to recover. So it can help stretch our forage as a response to weather, or our forage can be affected by the weather, as in the first example. All right, so when done correctly, and correctly is kind of a weird word because there's no single right way to do this, we can see some pretty cool benefits of rotationally stocking animals. More forage to harvest and more harvest efficiency. This may end up being greater carrying capacity on your operation because you're using the available vegetation a lot more efficiency. Less is being trampled, less is being wasted. Over time, we see people talking about the changes in forage makeup. Look at the photo I showed of, the very diverse pasture for my goats. So this can lead to a more productive farm on the same acres. We can see some better forage quality because we're not overgrazing the desirable things into oblivion. We might be able to get some legumes established if we manage the right way, partially through how we're doing grazing, how we're stocking the animals. That said, I won't deny the fact that there are downsides to this. It takes a lot more labor and infrastructure. And sometimes when we're putting animals in a high stocking density situation because we want them to eat more of the available forage, the challenge with that becomes those individual animals may not perform as well. They may not be achieving the highest possible daily gain that they might. Our gain per acre should expand or should go up, but the individual animals might not be at their absolute peak. This photo is from one of my mob stock pastures. So to compare, again, I was comparing 10 cows on an acre for about a week and a half. We'd measure the forage height and determine when to rotate from there. That took very little time, easy peasy. My second treatment as a grad student was strip stocking. So pull up a fence line every day, give them another, slice of forage, and then they'd move to a new paddock or a new sub pasture about once every 10 to 14 days. That was not a lot of work. Check the animals once a day, make sure the water's working, move them on, great. Rotating 4 times a day for the mob stocking was kind of miserable. I did not love it, not going to lie. And I can't say from the 2 years of doing the research, can't say we saw enough benefits in that 2 years to really make it worth our while. So you'll hear me say a lot of times, this has to fit in your lifestyle too. And for a lot of us, 4 times a day rotation may not be it. All right, so some of these benefits: improve forage harvest efficiency. So again, we get this by increasing the number of animals, or increasing the amount of time they have on a paddock, or making the paddock smaller. get more consumption, get more trampling. Like I said, as we're harvesting more forage, we could see carrying more animals per acre. We just have to make sure we allow the forage adequate rest so that we're not overgrazing it if we come back later. You probably will find that if you're grazing more efficiently, you've got areas you can set aside for stockpiling. Virtual fence is one of the coolest new things to hit the grazing world. And I was at a presentation a couple of weeks ago down in Missouri, and one of the farmers said, I'm grazing so much more efficiently now that I, can allocate just a limited amount of this cover crop per day. The guy said that he now has more forage than he can deal with. He no longer needs more acres to graze because he's grazing his existing acres better. This is the same concept. In the long term, having consistent animal pressure, getting it uniformly across areas gets us more uniform manure deposition, might improve soil health. Hopefully we start to see healthier pastures in general. We can see improved forage quality. This might be because we're monitoring the regrowth and we're returning our animals to paddocks at the right forage stage. Or it might be because through this cycle of disturbance and rest, we're allowing other types of forage to establish. It was not like, this was one of the cool observations from my grad research. It was never significant enough to be like a proven effect, but we did find that in paddocks that we had the mob stocked cows. So like it was like 330,000 pounds per acre, I think, per day was the average stocking rate we ran. They would occasionally graze down that forage pretty hard, either because they were hungry or because it was at a certain vegetation state. And when they really did, we often saw more legumes the following year. So we saw a change in some of the forage makeup because we could open up that canopy, get the sunlight to the ground, get those dormant seeds going. It really changed how things worked. Now, we looked at this though and said, oh my gosh, that's like a lot of red clover. Are we going to have to worry about bloat? The other cool thing about the high stocking density is that, nope, those animals were in there long enough that not only did they eat all the candy from the red clover, they still had to eat the grass growing alongside it. They still got enough fiber. So we're also like, we can also force them to somewhat balance their diet compared to, say, folks who let cows out on a cornfield after harvest and the cows get too much, straight shell corn and bloat. We're forcing them to consume some fiber and balance that protein out. All right, can we see improved animal performance? In the short term, if we have fewer animals, or we have a shorter grazing time and a larger area, yeah, we can let them be more selective. We are not going to force them to eat everything in a paddock like you saw in the last few photos. Folks doing this with stockers or finishers, they're letting the young growing animals get the really digestible, high protein candy. And then you might bring mama cows in behind them to harvest the rest of it. They have fewer, slightly lower needs. So this does allow greater animal performance on an individual basis, also without risking overgrazing though. So it's different than simply letting those 10 stocker steers out onto 10 acres and saying, well, yeah, they'll find the best stuff. No, they're going to regraze those good plants into oblivion and they're not going to eat the rest. This balances those two things. In the long term, though, having pastures that are rotated through, generally, we're not going to see loafing areas. We're not going to see nutrient-loaded areas because we're forcing them to distribute more evenly. So I can see, this is not what I've proven, but I can see where that's going to mean less fly exposure, less mud. There's some people who swear by walking their animals every day. And so part of their rotation scheme is also just getting them all up and moving. Can't say that I've found that to prevent foot rot or anything, but I see where the mentality comes from. Okay, so we've identified the different levers in rotational stocking. We can influence the grazing animals, how many, how big, and that influences the impact. We can manage the space. More space means that there's less impact at a fixed animal or time factor. And we can impact the time, the duration of grazing, and the rest. In reality, though, if we have a herd of 10 cows, most of us are not in a situation where we are easily going to be adjusting that or where we want to be adjusting that. We might have to destock if it's drastic, but simply adjusting the number of head is not the easiest thing to do. Heck, it's hard to upstock right now because of the price of cows. You mentioned, or you might have heard, I don't have any cows at this moment because I can't afford them, but I'll get them back someday. So we're usually adjusting space and time. Those are the two management levers we really have influence on. So if you're planning a stocking system, you might plan it out by space. So you look at your field and you say, all right, the best way to divide this, we're going to end up with 16 paddocks. So you end up with 16 paddocks and you're going to put the animals in and you're just observing the pasture rotate when they've consumed your target level of the current paddock, flip them to the next one. Or you might say, I know that I really want to go for a 35-day rest period for my forage. There's a way to back calculate and figure out how many paddocks you need to get that rest period based on, all right, I want 35 days of rest. I want to rotate every 3 days. Calculate the number of paddocks you need, and that's going to determine how big they are. Or you get good at this and you can kind of eyeball, all right, the forage is growing really fast. I want to remove the cows every day. So this is about how much space I need. It's impressive how really good some people are at just eyeballing that. So how often should you rotate? How big should your paddocks be? I'm not going to get too far into this because I think Dr. Gruss is handling it next. And the reality is there's no really right or wrong answer. But the vaguest guidelines, but best starting place I've heard. Avoid grazing most of our forages below 4 to 6 inches stubble height, because that's when we might trim the growing points. We might harm them. We're really, harming the root stores. It's going to take them longer to recover, and we might put them at a disadvantage. You should rotate before your plants start sending up new leaves. Again, we want to prevent overgrazing. A lot of times that's 7 to 10 days for many of our forage species. And we want to allow for adequate rest. A lot of cool season pastures, that's going to be 30-ish days. Think about cutting hay. But all of these things will vary by species, by location, and then will vary throughout the growing season. My biggest one, though, you've heard me say it a few times, though, avoid a system that is either so rigid you can't adapt to changing conditions, whether that's the number of animals you have on your farm, or the weather, or the time you have available. Avoid a system that is so demanding time-wise or energy-wise that you can't or don't want to just go out and observe and plan and record things. And avoid a system that is so painstaking to do that you hate doing it. Find something that's going to fit in your life. For me, talking about my grad research, yes, I did rotate cows 4 times a day for 2 summers. And I kind of hated that part of it. It was not my favorite thing. I liked rotating the cows once a day. I still got them up. I still got to observe them. I knew when every cow in that pasture was going to calve because I still saw her every day, sometimes twice. I'd come back. But that was my happy medium of rotation frequency. With my goats, it's about every 3 to 5 days. I'm avoiding the parasite cycle. I know, okay, a couple days from now, I got to build fence again, but in between now and then, I can get other work done on the farm without having to know I got to go traipse around and drag netting through things. So in conclusion, implementing rotational stocking offers a lot of potential benefits. It requires management, observation, time for labor, and planning. It's not something you should do without some thought and deliberation. As you increase your rotation frequency or your rest period, it's almost always going to yield some sort of benefits to you, your animals, and the forage system. Try new things. Don't get stuck on, I am going to rotate 3 times a day at 1,000,000 pounds per acre because that's what I've heard grazing guru such and such do. Try different things. Try doing that. Adjust. See what you like. See what the impacts are. Be flexible and don't get stuck on any one thing. And like I've said, find something that works for you, your life, and your animals. That's all I've got. Contact info is there. Always happy to chat grazing. And yes, I can talk about cows, even though I mostly have small ruminants right now. I do love talking about small ruminants, so hit me up for that as well.